walked into the store for one thing, maybe milk, maybe a charger cable. 20 minutes later, you are standing at the checkout with a basket full of items you never planned to buy, cannot fully explain, and will likely never use. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. You felt completely in control the entire time. This is not a story about willpower. It is not a story about discipline or self-control or being a careless spender. It is a story about a force so quiet, so well disguised, that the people who study it for a living call it exactly what economists called the market forces that shape society without anyone consciously directing them. An invisible hand. Except this one is not shaping markets. It is shaping you. And by the end of this video, you will never walk into a store the same way again. If you find psychology, philosophy, human behavior, and the strange invisible forces that shape modern life genuinely fascinating, this channel exists for exactly that. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next, because this is just the beginning. Let's start with a question that sounds simple but isn't. Why did you buy the last thing you did not actually need? If you are like most people, your answer will involve logic after the fact. You needed it for a project. It was on sale. It would be useful eventually. But here is what decades of behavioral research consistently show. The decision happened before the logic did. Your brain made the choice first, emotionally and instantly, and then your conscious mind stepped in afterward to write the justification. Psychologists call this post hoc rationalization, and it is one of the most well-documented phenomena in the entire field of decision science. Think about that for a moment. You are not the author of most of your purchasing decisions. You are the press secretary, called in after the decision has already been made, tasked with explaining it convincingly. This is not a flaw unique to careless people. It happens to disciplined people, wealthy people, intelligent people, people who genuinely believe they are above marketing tricks. Because the system was never built to be defeated by intelligence. It was built to bypass intelligence entirely. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to a man named Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who in the early 20th century took his uncle's theories about the unconscious mind and applied them not to therapy, but to selling products. Bernays understood something that would quietly reshape the entire global economy. People do not buy products because they need them. People buy products because of what those products represent, about who they are, who they want to be, and how they want to be seen. In 1929, Bernays orchestrated one of the most famous public relations campaigns in history, convincing American women that smoking cigarettes was an act of feminist liberation, calling them torches of freedom. Cigarette sales among women surged. The product had not changed. The need had not changed. What changed was the story attached to the product. This was the moment modern advertising stopped selling objects and started selling identity. And once you start selling identity instead of objects, you create something far more powerful and far more dangerous than simple demand. You create want that feels indistinguishable from need. Here is where the psychology gets genuinely fascinating. Your brain processes the anticipation of a reward differently than the reward itself. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz, working with primates and later replicated extensively in human studies, discovered that dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, actually spikes most intensely in the moments leading up to a reward, not during the reward itself. This means the high you feel walking through a store, scrolling a sale page, watching the countdown timer on a limited time offer, is often more intense than the satisfaction of actually owning the thing afterward. The wanting is the high. The having is almost an afterthought, and often a quiet disappointment. This explains something almost everyone has experienced but rarely names. The strange emptiness that follows an unboxing. The new item that felt essential in the store, now sitting forgotten in a drawer within weeks. You were never chasing the object. You were chasing the chemical spike that came from anticipating it. Marketers did not invent this mechanism. They simply learned to trigger it with extraordinary precision. Now let's talk about scarcity, because this is where the invisible hand becomes almost impossible to resist, even when you know exactly what is happening. In 1975, psychologists Stephen Warchel, Jerry Lee, and Akanbi Adewole ran an experiment using two identical jars of cookies. One jar contained 10 cookies. The other contained only 2. Participants consistently rated the cookies from the nearly empty jar as more desirable, more valuable, and better tasting, despite the cookies being completely identical. The only thing that changed was scarcity. This single finding explains an enormous portion of modern retail psychology. Only 3 left in stock. Sale ends tonight. Limited edition. These are not informational notices. They are precisely engineered triggers, exploiting a bias hardwired into human cognition since long before supermarkets existed. Back when scarcity genuinely meant survival was at stake. Your ancestors who reacted urgently to scarce resources outlived those who did not. That instinct kept entire bloodlines alive for hundreds of thousands of years. And today, that exact same ancient survival mechanism is being activated by a digital countdown timer selling phone cases. If you are starting to see how deeply this runs, and you want to understand the hidden architecture behind your own decisions even further, make sure you are subscribed, because we are only getting to the most important part of this story. And I would genuinely love to know, has there ever been a purchase you made that you still cannot fully explain? Tell me about it in the comments, because I promise you are far from alone. Let's go deeper into the philosophy of this, because the ancient Stoics, 2,000 years before neuroscience existed, identified the exact mechanism we are describing with startling precision. Epictetus taught that human suffering comes not from external events but from our judgments about them, and crucially, from confusing what we want with what we actually need. He argued that desire is a kind of self-inflicted poverty, because the moment you want something you do not have, you have declared yourself lacking, regardless of how much you actually possess. Modern consumer culture operates as an engine almost perfectly designed to manufacture this exact feeling on an industrial scale. Every advertisement is, at its core, a carefully crafted message that says you are currently incomplete, and here is the object that will complete you. The cycle only works if the completion never quite arrives. And it never does, because the satisfaction was never really about the object in the first place. This is why consumer satisfaction research consistently finds something deeply counterintuitive. Material purchases provide a sharp, short-term happiness boost that fades rapidly, often within days, a phenomenon researchers call hedonic adaptation. Experiential purchases, things like travel, shared meals, time with people you love, tend to provide longer-lasting satisfaction precisely because they cannot be replaced by a newer, shinier version next month. The invisible hand profits enormously from your inability to feel finished. A satisfied customer who needs nothing further is, from a purely economic standpoint, a customer who has stopped being useful. There is another layer to this that deserves serious attention because it touches something deeply social rather than purely psychological. Social comparison theory, first articulated by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1954, proposes that humans determine their own worth largely by comparing themselves to others. In an era of curated social media feeds, this comparison engine runs constantly, fed by an endless stream of other people's highlight reels. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania found that limiting social media use to 30 minutes a day led to significant reductions in loneliness and depression within just 3 weeks, partly because participants were no longer constantly recalibrating their sense of what they should own, look like, or be doing based on curated images of strangers. This matters enormously for our story, because so much of modern impulse buying is not actually about the product at all. It is about closing a gap between how we currently see ourselves and how we believe we are supposed to appear to others. The purchase becomes a small private negotiation with our own self-image, a temporary patch over a much larger and more complicated feeling. So if this system is so deeply embedded, so psychologically sophisticated, so historically engineered, is there actually a way out? The honest answer is not through willpower alone, because willpower was never built to compete with an industry that spends hundreds of billions of dollars annually studying exactly how to bypass it. The more effective approach, supported by behavioral economists like Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for his work on this exact subject, involves something called choice architecture. Rather than relying on willpower in the moment of temptation, you redesign your environment in advance, before the impulse even has a chance to activate. This might look like removing saved payment information so that purchases require deliberate friction. It might mean implementing a mandatory waiting period, even just 24 hours, before any non-essential purchase above a certain amount. It might simply mean asking one honest question before checkout. Am I buying this because I need it, or because I am trying to feel something that this object cannot actually provide? That single question, asked consistently, interrupts the entire mechanism we have spent this video unpacking. It does not require superhuman discipline. It requires only a moment of awareness, deployed at exactly the right point in the process, the same point the invisible hand depends on you never pausing to examine. Here is the thought I want to leave you with, the one I think matters more than anything else we have covered today. The invisible hand of modern impulse is not some sinister conspiracy operating against you personally. It is simply the accumulated result of an extraordinary amount of human ingenuity, originally developed by people like Bernays nearly a century ago, refined continuously by neuroscience, psychology, and now artificial intelligence, all pointed at one single persistent target: the gap between who you are and who you feel you are supposed to become. The most powerful realization is not that this system exists, it is that simply knowing it exists changes your relationship to it entirely. Awareness is the one variable the system was never designed to account for, because a customer who pauses to ask why is a customer the entire machine was built to prevent. So here is my question for you, and I genuinely want to know the answer. Think back to the last thing you bought that you did not need. What were you actually feeling in that moment, right before you bought it? Was it boredom, loneliness, stress, the need to feel like you were moving forward in some way? Tell me in the comments, because understanding that feeling, more than any productivity hack or savings tip, is the real key to finally seeing the invisible hand for what it actually is. If this video changed how you think about even one purchase you will make this week, that is exactly the kind of shift this channel is built around. Like this video, if it gave you something to think about, subscribe if you want more of this, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. I will see you in the next video.